So today, basically we're going to go over some newer stuff that I've been learning about sort of through Calgary and going to Vancouver and learning about primal movement patterns and also in Ontario. So there's a big thing that's been coming up now. I don't know how many of you guys offer either functional movement screening in your facility or you've heard of like FMS testing. Have you guys worked with that at all? Yeah, and where are people from in the room here today? U of A? Where else? Pardon me? Nate? U of A? Oh, nice. So, I'm at Royal? Okay. Yeah, so actually, yeah, and in BC, so if you've been working in BC, functional movement, screening, testing, all that is huge out there right now. It's actually quite a bit ahead of where we are in Calgary and Alberta, and it's also really popular out in Ontario. So you'll see a lot of these like primal movement, animal movement sort of workouts coming up, and also when we look at injury rehabilitation in sports. So that's basically what we're going to be talking about today. As she said in the introduction, I sort of have a multifaceted approach from my work here at an integrative health center and then working with a lot of athletes. I've worked with a lot of different sports, and especially in volleyball, that's been where my main focus has been this last year. So I train the really tall giants that they're actually in Winnipeg this weekend, but they're like 7'2", and I get to boss them around, so it's pretty fun. But part of my involvement coming back into sport after clinical was in this injury rehab and prevention, and then also in working with kids. So I work with a lot of teams over at the Volley Dome. The kids are 14, 15, 16, 17, and after working in the rehab program with people with knee and hip arthritis in their 50s and 60s, we're trying to see how can we help prevent some of those injuries coming, for the kids right from when they're little that I'm seeing, at an older age for a lot of people, and a lot of ex-athletes or people that have had, hip replacements, knee replacements, that sort of thing. So basically within active living here and personal training and our athletic development, we're trying to have implement that long-term model, and through that functional training is a way that we're able to do that. So there are some shots around our facility, which hopefully you've got a tour through a little bit this weekend. And that's a few of our trainers there. So we'll see some pretty fun stuff they're doing on the statues out front there. And so yeah, like I said, when we look at some of the functional movement or things that, oh, is that, did I miss that? Oh, that's okay. But yeah, so when we're looking at functional movement, there's a lot of kind of trendy things we'll see for like with TRX and that sort of stuff. Today we're going to be talking a lot about core stabilization and body weight type exercises. Oh yeah, for sure. So with the trend of the primal movement patterns, you might have heard of animal flow. Have any of you guys seen this? I was trying to pull it up on the YouTube here, but the internet wasn't really working. Go look this up. It's like really neat to see. Like, this guy is crazy. He's in such good shape. He can move, and he literally moves like a jungle cat. And but again, it's one of those ones that we see often in kinesiology is the really trendy, nicely packaged product for what's going on out there. So there's some really cool stuff that he's doing in there, and what I want to talk about today is how would you either properly sequence your own type of workout for that. Because one thing I do find, and I don't know if you guys find the same, you look at P90X, you see these workout videos and you're like, hey, based on my knowledge of what I know about correct exercise or that or proper movement, I maybe wouldn't put this type of person in such a hard program, or we not use the modifications for someone else. Say if they have a joint injury or their kids, or being able to adapt to that level. So while there's some really cool stuff out there for the movement patterns, it may not necessarily be the best for all populations. And so whether you're working in kines or in that recreation setting, there's really smart ways to adapt the programming to fit your populations. So there's a few things when we look at movement patterns that we're talking about. There's global movement patterns. So we look at, Olympics are coming up here, so speed skaters. You'll see all the speed skaters and skiers and that sort of thing. So we look at contralateral patterns, which is so opposite arm and leg. So we look at our walking, running, that sort of thing. And then we look at our ipsilateral movement patterns, which are same arm, same leg, or loading across the same side of the body. So your golf swing, going to reach for something. When we're talking about movement patterns, that's the basic two that we're seeing in most sports. Lots of either activities or sports, you'll see transition from one to the other. And so like throwing sports, same thing. It'll go from ipsilateral to contralateral. So when we talk about a primal movement pattern, have you guys heard of that in relation to these terms before? Yeah, so we're looking at basic movements we do every single day, and this goes back to kind of our hunter-gatherer type of movements, and so squatting, lunging, twisting, bending, reaching, pushing, and again that gait. And these movements we do all the time throughout the day. You go to reach for your breakfast cereal, you are picking your bag up, you're twisting and bending, getting out of your car. As we're reaching for things. The only things that we're not seeing a ton of is when we sit at our desks all day. That's not anywhere on there. And that's kind of part of the problem, that we see with our student populations and staff populations at the different universities is we're not even going anywhere near any of these except maybe walking throughout a day. And so that's something that, for in activity and recreation, we want to get people back to using these movements. Our bodies were built to move this way. So the big thing is when we're looking at participation as well and trying to increase participation is, and this is a huge passion of mine, is within injury prevention and getting people who have limitations back into some kind of activity, and they're not writing off activities. And when we talk in the gym, I've worked in this gym for almost a decade now, and some people, their sport is the gym, most people it isn't. And so a lot of times our philosophy here for training is, what do you want to train for that's really fun for you? And how can we get that person back there so they have a specific goal? And again, when we look at the more sedentary lifestyles, a lot of people that we end up getting as clientele here, especially in personal training, just because they're seen for a little bit extra expertise, is, people that are injured that have those joint issues. And again, we get in that kind of pain cycle where people are experiencing decreased emotional and physical health, and that's going to decrease their willingness to want to come participate even more, because once they take a little bit of time off, they will start feeling worse and worse and worse, and it's harder to get back there. So a big thing that I've noticed just in working, with physio and a lot of different groups from general population to athletes is there's this missing link between what happens after physio and my exercise class, and being able to bridge that. So, in our facilities and with our trainers, we're trying to really emphasize that transitional portion of training to getting people back to those movements. And again, in physio, and there's a time and a place for everything. I'm all about the isolation exercises and strengthening, any really weak muscles, or if there's major muscle imbalances. But again, when I'm seeing a fall off in what we're missing is that we're not putting that back into a movement pattern. We're not getting people so that they can kind of get through their day, but can they go do another activity that they're wanting to participate in on top of that? So one of the things that, and this has come up, it's a little bit more popular in BC right now, is dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. So that's a big mouthful. Prague School of Rehab is so in Czech Republic, and there's a big school there that one of the doctors is running, and they're really they've been working with the Czech national level athletes and all the national teams and all the tennis players, hockey players, that sort of thing. And they've really gone back to what developmental movement patterns are. So looking at babies at 3 months, how do they crawl, move, how do we progress to standing, what are neutral spine positions? So it's an interesting, it's a very interesting field. There's very long workshops and training sessions you can do to learn their full approach. But basically their philosophy, and that's with FMS and functional movement screening, is training that movement pattern. So once we've got that muscle firing or working again, how do we integrate that into a purposeful movement that's going to be functional in someone's day? The other thing with them is they talk a lot about joint centration, which we'll get to, which is neutral alignment of joints, but in helping prevent repetitive strain injuries. So again, a lot of people, when they're wanting to participate in just activities that, whether it's swimming, hiking, those sort of things, we encourage them to get outside and do, or whether they're training for a triathlon, a lot of the ones we see are repetitive strain injuries, because we're trying to get people to increase the duration in their activity, but then after an hour or 2 hours of doing that, we're starting to see issues. So this sort of approach and looking at stabilizing the body in as we move around is becoming a lot more popular, because we're seeing with just isolation techniques for exercises that it's not working for long term. And the biggest thing I can say about that is just especially if you're working with people that are very, very active, you'll see a lot more of those repetitive strain injuries start to come up, and they're the ones frustrated coming back trying to figure out what's going on there. And so these kind of techniques are really useful for a lot of them. Oh, thanks. So we'll talk about today, and then if you come to the workout later, so core planar sequencing, that's being able to do proper warm-up for your spine. So have you guys heard of this before? Yes? Okay, so some people have, some haven't. Yeah, and so what it is, it's exactly. So yeah, so some people, like I said, it depends on, and all of us have a very different knowledge base, and so what we always want to look at is how can we properly warm up the spine? Are there smart ways, and if we do a fun animal workout, could I be putting someone at risk? Could I be actually helping them? How do I take these sort of fun ideas and make it so that it's safe for someone? Because there's a lot of mistakes made in programming and in group exercise, or even in individual training, where we think we're helping someone, but just little things are actually putting them at a disadvantage, especially if they have a previous injury. So sagittal plane, so that's sort of looking at flexion extension, frontal, we're going here, and then transverse is our rotation. So as far as the spine goes, there's that sequence is going to warm the spine up without putting a ton of pressure on the discs and get the right muscles working first. So we look at that chain of command, and that's what that type of a warm-up would do. And again, we're always looking at trying to have stability for a joint first, and then working on the mobility. Thanks. So ideal posture. Who knows what perfect posture is? Do you know what school of thought? School of thought you might follow. Does anyone know what components of ideal posture might be? What isn't it, Dom?
What we're all doing all the time.
Yeah. So there's, have you guys heard of like having a good anterior pelvic tilt, or extension through upper back, that sort of stuff? Okay, so I've seen over the last 7 years, probably 8 or 9, 10 different approaches to posture. It's always changing. It depends if you go to Pilates, that's different than what happens if you go to yoga, which is different than if you go to DNS, so they talk about something a little bit different. So we're always arguing over what this neutral spine is, and basically, I mean, now that we're learning more about how biomechanically we can all be built so differently, is we don't know if there's that perfect posture. There's some new articles I was just reading that were talking about just how even the hip socket, they're showing all these, all the skeletons of how different people's hip sockets can be, and how that really affects their squatting pattern, and how basically we're just looking for ease of movement. And that's sort of what you want to be doing when we're, looking at some of these movement patterns, is not being, perfect alignment for squat is like toes straight, T-spine's this way or this way. It's sometimes for a person having to adapt that. Basically, what we're looking for more than, I have a really good neutral back curve. Well, a lot of newer sort of developmental kinesiologists are saying, we should actually have more of a flat lumbar spine, because we've gone this more to that arch, and we're seeing all these L4, L5 disc herniations and that sort of thing. So, like I said, what we're really looking at is what is optimal alignment for the joints to transfer force, and then how is that going to help with the muscles. And again, for each individual, that might be a little bit different. So joint centration, so we see that a lot, so in a lot of sports. And again, what you'll visually recognize it as is ease of movement, and it'll just look nice. So nice clean lines, that sort of thing. And basically, like I said, you just get more stability and more force that you can produce with the muscles that are designed to help you with that movement. So when we see the repetitive strain injuries, is when we're asking muscles or ligaments to do a job that really isn't theirs, or you see people get clicking in the knee or shoulder. Okay, we've got something off in the alignment that could be stemming from somewhere else in the body. And I think the more you get into learning about movement in the body and kind of that kinesiology side of the movement patterns, you realize how complicated it can be, and it can sometimes be overwhelming. You'll go to some, they'll say some people with an osteopath, so they look at the connective tissue lines. You have connective tissue in your big toe attached to the top of your head. They'll be looking at, you have a problem here, they're actually looking down in your lower body. So there's different specialties, and that's what's kind of cool about it, is there's so much we don't know, and there's all these different health professionals investigating that we can continue to examine, okay, what are the best ways to help with the joints? Is it the muscles? Is it the connective tissue, that tissue surrounding the muscles that is changing our alignment? So I said we're looking at that neutral position, and especially with our repetitive strain injury. You can go to the next one. Thanks. So the big thing is okay, I know all that. I want to be in a pretty good alignment. Where do I even start? So someone comes in, or we have a group coming in, what's some of the stuff that we're looking at, and especially if we're trying to look at movement or stabilization. What would you guys start with if someone was coming in? Same thing if they had a back injury, shoulder injury, that sort of thing. Yeah, so you would probably do some testing on them, some kind of movement testing, that sort of thing. The big thing is a lot of people will skip that step. And that's a really big problem within, individual or personal training, is having that functional testing part of it. Now, in a group setting, are you going to be able to do that? Probably not. So what we look for is some of the common things that people are missing in their programming. Some people jump right to the weights. The biggest thing we look at now is what's our core stabilization and what's proper stabilization for the spine, especially because that stabilization is going to affect how I move through my arms and my legs. You can remember this in there. So breathing, so we know diaphragm breathing, right? So it's belly breathing. What happens to the diaphragm when I breathe in and out? You can go to the next one. So the two things that we are looking to correct before we get into all this fancy movement stuff is your stabilization and breathing pattern. Most of us are chest breathers. Okay, and that's why when we talk about that joint centration or optimal alignment is our posture. So a really good example here is, Ivan, 7'2" volleyball player. He's a very tall guy Jovan's from Serbia. Ivan's from France, yeah, and him and his brother, Grigor, yeah. So they're brothers, they're giants, whatever. They're like this.
Well, it's because they have to duck under all the doors.
They have to duck under the doors. He has a spinal fusion as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so he comes in and he's had back problems and shoulder problems, and he has this really bad kyphosis, which as a middle hitter, if you can't turn, you're in a lot of trouble. And so when people with a really bad kyphosis, the first thing I check on them is if they're a chest breather. How many breaths am I taking a minute? Do you know what the average is? How many breaths a minute we take in? 12 to 16. Exercise, yeah, we're going to be a lot higher there. If I'm using accessory muscles all day, that many times, what's going to be tight? Yeah, my chest, my pecs. So I'm doing a repetitive movement over and over and over. What's the most important thing we do every day? Breathe. If I don't breathe, that's it. Okay, we're toast. So if someone is chest breathing, are they going to be using their diaphragm very well in exercises? Probably not. And then if we're looking for, that joint alignment and correcting that, we're really trying to train that breathing pattern first. I could have given Ivan all the posture, row, stretching exercises in the world, and I wouldn't have helped him if I didn't teach him how to breathe properly. And people won't even really notice if they're doing that or not. So one thing we can do, so take your hand, put it on your chest here, then put one on your stomach, and then just try and let only the one on the stomach move. So take a breath in, and it doesn't need to be a big breath, right? Because when we're exercising, we are probably wanting to use those accessory muscles. That's why they're the second chain of command. But we're trying to breathe with just that hand on the stomach moving. And a lot of times in exercise, we're told, okay, just suck it in, draw your abs in. That as a way to stabilize the spine. That's not necessarily the best way to do that. And especially in people with back issues and shoulder issues, we'll see that pattern is off. Yeah. Oh, when I first learned about this stuff, this is in... Yeah. No, when I was at my DNS course and they talk a ton about this diaphragmatic breathing. I literally sat there for 3 days on this exercise ball and like at the course just like neurotic about my breathing. I was like, oh, am I doing it this way? And it took me a while to get that natural breathing or core stability trained, because I had gone from she kind of talked about my journey here was I've been running all over the place training, and then I got more administrative work and I was sitting at a desk all of a sudden, and my posture just went right out the window for probably 6 months. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting all this pain and I'm used to running around a bit more. And so I became one of my clients. Oh, yeah, and I broke my foot. I'm a little klutzy. So, yeah, I've done a lot of rehab on myself, so I'm very experienced in that. So, so what we just talked about was that frontal expansion, which is the most commonly cued one, especially in yoga. Yes? Yeah, I'll show you some pictures in a second that will explain why that is and what the action of the diaphragm, and you can just go back to that one. So this is part of where we actually get a little bit of a disconnect in teaching methods, is most teachers when cueing diaphragmatic breathing, and was anyone here in band?
Yeah, when you're
Singing? You're trained in that diaphragmatic breathing. We're all trained to only look at the frontal expansion. What is often missing is the lateral expansion. So you can go to the next one there. So this is something that when we look at the action of the diaphragm, the most common one we'll see is the hourglass syndrome, which is when I take a breath in, I just let the stomach go out, but my hands to go out. But what we actually want is that even lateral expansion in the diaphragm. So if you take your hands sort of like this, put them on the side or lower part of your ribs, and then I want you to breathe in through the stomach and get your hands out to the side, without that chest coming up, okay? So my chest isn't moving, but I'm getting that side of the diaphragm to push out a little bit. And I'm gonna make you all as neurotic as I was, because I was like, oh, I'm a chest breather, and I've had SI issues that through a combination of working at the running injury clinic and this, I've helped correct, But yeah, for me, not fully understanding that lateral expansion of the diaphragm. Now, it's hard to cue because, again, if we're in too much of an arch or too much of a posterior pelvic tilt, we're going to have, going back to that joint centration, we're not going to get the even expansion of the diaphragm. So if I you can stay there. So if I go, just one more. So if we look at that hourglass syndrome, think how easy it is to bend the spine. I'm kind of like this, right? And whereas if I have that fuller cylinder, and what I talk about, this is again one of my volleyball guys, he's an engineer, and how I explain this to him, I'm like, your support beams in your building are not working. You're just putting up more drywall. So when they're working only on planking, bridging exercises, and we're forgetting about this diaphragmatic breathing during those exercises, again, we're just putting up more drywall, we're not getting that internal structural support. And so, again, when we go to some of these primal movements, you'll see in all of them, we see a flat spine, and then cueing that full cylinder breathing is going to allow me to move a lot easier without kind of giving out at the hips or that core giving out. Again, I've had people who can hold a plank for ages, they have back problems, and then once I learned this, I was like, oh, I'm going to start checking this on them. And so one of the things you can see on the picture there is just a quick test is someone, if they're sitting on the table, you can just kind of have your hands at the back there and just at normal rest, see if they're even getting any breath there. Okay, and one way we can use to cue that is, so you put your hands back on your ribs here. So we've worked on, so first you might want to start someone with, okay, can we just fill the belly up? Okay, and just focus on frontal for a bit. And so again, Ivan, tall one, I said, fill your stomach up like a balloon. All of a sudden he got it. And we saw that working. But again, they won't even know what you're asking them to do right at the start. And so once you can get that, then it's easier to go to these side ones. Now what I can do is breathe all your air out and press into your ribs as hard as you can. So, and now breathe in and relax your hands and feel that go out to the side there. And then if you breathe out and press in, and then breathing in and trying to get those hands to move. Now you may not feel anything going at all, okay? It took me a lot of practice to start working on that because my muscles were not working properly. And so an easy way you can do this is this stable. Okay, so I lay down. So you can lay down, feet up. This puts my lumbar spine in a neutral position. I put my hands there. Okay, my head would normally be down. I'm too tall for this table. And so I would work on the breathing there. And then you can really see someone's chest. So if I'm working with a client or a group, actually with groups and teams I train now, breathing is the first thing we work on. Very first thing. And so I'll be able to see right away, are they a chest breather? And it's a really quick check. You can walk around the room, look, and you can see that very easily. And so, yes?
Just a quick question.
Yeah, for sure.
You talked about the plank, and everyone plank are always going and sucking your stomach, and actually, like sometimes I feel when I suck in my stomach and I'm doing plank, it helps to support my back, like my back's hurting.
Yeah, so a lot of times that's more your transverse abs, and that's sometimes about the alignment of the lumbar spine. So if we're drawing the transverse abs in, but what I'm talking about more so is the correct lateral expansion in the diaphragm breathing. So it's not about, and again, we're looking to that neutral alignment. So a lot of times people in plank will get to here, and that posterior pelvic tilt in a plank will activate the transverse abs and help stabilize the superficial muscles. But before doing that, you'd want to work on the internal ones and make sure that you're breathing correctly. It's, like I said, there's different positions to work on. Like the one I was showing you is one of the easiest ones to start working on to train that correct breathing. But you'll find people will be able to do that there, and then they go into plank and they lose that ability to breathe properly. And that's why people in plank will like to hold their breath, because if I hold my breath, where's my diaphragm's contracted, right? So often they will hold their breath and we're like, oh, breathe more and more. And for them, they might need that stability. You know, you don't want them to pass out. So you still want to encourage them to breathe. But yeah, I haven't made that mistake yet. So lots of trainer mistakes. No one passed out in our group ever, hey? No. And, but yeah, So again, with kids or when we talk about animals and birds, you know, we can start to make it fun. Again, I work with varsity level university age up to, you know, people in their 70s, 80s. Everybody loves pretending they're animals, and they have a really good time with it. So you can, you know, so the hummingbird breath. So again, you can put your hands on your side there, and then it's just going. So when you breathe out through the nose, it's so let's all try and be hummingbirds. Yeah, and so it's just out through the nose, but say if I don't use my stomach, and you can teach people how to contract that diaphragm a little more forcefully. The other one that's fun is the whale breath. So, you know, they breathe in through the nose and then on the way out, same thing, is kind of training that contraction. So you can get creative with it. Again, it depends on, you know, the age group you're working with, but like I said, everybody I meet is a big kid, so they like this and have fun. So today, the workout we're going to go over later, and some of the exercises today, it's going from, you know, quadruped to biped. So I put the dinos on there and the T-Rex, it's biped. but yeah, so there's a ton of different positions for, you know, with the animals that we can work on that are in relation to the human ones. So again, we go back to that back mobility. So we talked about the proper warm-up sequencing. So making sure we go from that sagittal to frontal to transverse plane. And these ones are all the kind of quadruped or kneeling patterns. And so the most common one we know is kind of that cat-cow, so spinal flexion and extension. The big thing about these ones, I'm correcting a lot of people, is that neutral joint alignment. So when we're looking at that kneeling position, you know, are we here? Are we here? What are their hands like? Are their hands like this? Are we out this way? So that we have neutral alignment. So elbow over here. Now my elbows are really gross. They hyperextend a lot. Okay, if I'm not thinking about it, it goes to there. So I'm always thinking, especially in women, you'll see a lot of women hyperflexible, that we're not hyperextending here. We're in that soft bend in the elbow. Same thing through the spine, and like I said, that's knees right under the hips. So with all of these, we're looking at that neutral alignment. So again, with that extension, so we can start going into these lunge and reach patterns. So that would be a standing way to work on the same thing. So with a lot of these, you're going to see, I want to work on extension. I want to work on lateral flexion. There's a zillion ways that you can do that, and you can mix it up to make it a workout easier or harder. Make it part of warm up. Make it part of like I said, part of the whole workout. Maybe some of them you're adding weights to that. Yeah, that's all. That's even Shiv. Shiv's smiling. Yeah, he hates exercising. So same thing. So we can go into these lunges and like the giraffe, and so I'm going into flexion. So sometimes we'll do that lunge, drop down into flexion, and as long as we're not weighted, we aren't too worried on certain ones of these about the rounded back through the hip hinge. There's other ones we'll be a little more picky on that. Then we go into lateral spine flexion. So, we're doing our kind of squat, reach and stretch this way, and then puppy tail look. So this one, people always get a kick out of this. So you go on all fours, and then you're just looking side to side. So it's like a dog wagging its tail, or my volleyball guys call it sassy puppy if they are trying to get lower back going too. So again, kneeling lunge, lateral flexion. So we all know, our hip flexor stretch here. Okay, so we can go into extension here, or again, that lateral flexion. So there's, 4 or 5 ways I can achieve the same purpose, and modify that based on the person. Say I have someone that can't really do the lunging, or they're having a hard time, on the knees. Okay, well, I might want to do a little bit more of a quarter squat, that sort of thing. So glute activation, that's another thing I find most people, especially students, staff, sitting all day. So we do the hip flexor stretching first, so release out through the hip. If my hip is too tight, how am I supposed to get out here? I'm going to put more strain on my lumbar spine, right? So I want to try and loosen up through here, so that's why I usually have the hip stretches first. It's also, who knows what reciprocal inhibition is? You know what that term is? Yeah? So what reciprocal inhibition is when I have one muscle that's too tight, the opposing muscle is just not even going to fire, okay? So again, the most common one for people that are sitting throughout the day, and then, okay, I've been sitting in class all day, boom, I want to go to Zumba, I want to go to my exercise class, and they haven't warmed up the hips, they haven't loosened up through there, and they've been sitting with hip flexors in a shortened position, and then you're asking them to do all these lunging movements. Well, my glute max is not going to be activating very well. And that alone, just this being too tight, the muscle might be strong or it might be able to fire, but if all day we're sitting and it's just so tight, it's just going to shut that muscle right off. So then we'll do the stuff like donkey kicks, and there's different versions again. So I've had people with wrist problems, we go down to the elbows. Same with shoulder problems. If they've had lower back, I might go to more that straight extension versus the bent leg. And again, we talk about that core stability. Say someone has poor core stability and goes right into that hyperextension really easily. I probably don't want to do that bent leg version. I might want to start with something more on that low leg extension. So the other thing I see missed most often in group exercise and also in warm-ups is neuromuscular. So I always do flamingo, you can do tree, whatever, but some type of balance exercise or neuromuscular component. It can be static. We can start going into a dynamic movement. We can start moving the leg out, move the head around. There's a lot of ways to be doing that, but especially with the children's programs, I was finding a lot of them were not getting this balance component because they can't sit still. They're like running all over. And so to get them to do a little bit of a balance warm-up can be something really beneficial for them. And especially when you're working with more high school age, the ankle sprains are one of the most common things, and it's just the proprioception's not warmed up. Same thing, with anyone coming in for, now say if I'm going to be, just going on to maybe some machines, do I need to do this balance warm-up right at the start? Not necessarily. Again, that's where you're looking at the order of the program for the person or the group that you're working with. So we all know inchworms, push-ups. One thing I noted at the start, push-ups are in the transverse plane, which means that should come a bit later. I find, again, people jump into push-ups maybe a bit too early for some of the warm-ups or workouts. And so that's something that I usually put a little bit later. Okay, so it's still at the start, or some people, again, we won't even do the push-up. We'll just try that inchworm and go from there. It depends, again, on the level you're dealing with. So then we look at thoracic spine. So rotation through the upper back, which is a really easy test for that. We do this for all the volleyball players, throwing sports, and I work with some badminton players, same thing. I always check how far can they actually rotate without their knees starting to move. So are they getting, so can you tell on me which side I'm better at? Yeah, left. So I play volleyball, so what arm might I hit with? I'm left-handed. So my rotation, and badminton, I play badminton tennis, I'm way better on that side. Now, if I'm getting really limited there and I'm working on it, but I'm gonna, again, have muscles pulling up my spine a little differently. And again, if I go to reach with my right side, I'm more likely to have an injury there because I can't get that full rotation, so I might pinch at my back a little bit more. So having right-sided back problems, that's something I'm working on. So look for, in people you can see, and that's even just exercise that we do is we contract through obliques and work on that rotation. And so obliques are on the top of the hip there. So put your hands over your shoulder. So let's all try this now. And we're just gonna, don't let the knees move, but you're gonna rotate and turn as far as you can until you might feel a pull in your upper back or a contraction through the abs. Okay, and then the other side. So did anyone feel more stuck on one side than the other? Yeah. And based on your activity or sport, that's gonna maybe determine that previous injury. Okay. Your flexibility in your pecs, that affects that one. So we look into pec flexibility as something else from that. So you'll see, like I said, we start doing these and like reaching up. There's a lot of different T-spine ones that integrate that pec mobility in with it as well. So yeah, that's a really quick one that you can check or work on your own. Now, say I get a cramp or something when I'm doing that, you might be going a little bit too hard, so you want to back off a bit. Yeah, so I'll say that's lunge with eagle wings. So again, and you can start getting that stretch through the obliques or that rotation. Broomstick, that's another good one to go side to side on for warm up, again, depending on what equipment you might have there. Nice. So owl look, so lunge with twist, right? So again, this one will just very slowly go that way. We can go to the arms out, so we've seen those ones before. Lower back, so eagles and scorpions, again, another common one. Again, notice with all these twisting ones, I would generally do them later, okay, once my flexion, extension, lateral flexion is warmed up there. So yeah, there's some pretty, so again, with the arms, you can go to pulling, so these sort of, so like the sloth ones, and again, so if you have towels or a slidey floor, crawling along the ground that way, you can even do one side at a time. And again, we get a little bit more of the upper body stuff because we've done so much slower. And monkeys, so there's a zillion versions of monkey. And if you go watch that Primal Movement video, the guy in it looks like a monkey going through, and it's kind of amazing. But yeah, there's a lot of the monkey ones because they're going into the jumping and lateral movement. So yeah, the next few sort of show those ones. So there's like monkey squats where they're down here, and then we're reaching up and going out this way. Again, someone with knee problems, we're doing this. Okay, so you can adjust the exercise to each person if that deep hip flexion is not the best for them. Kids will be down there in 2 seconds, so you can go to the next there. And there's, monkey push-ups, so then same thing and it's a good hip opener is get the hands down here, and then I can reach out to that push-up position or to that plank position. You can jump in or out of that. And then our next one, sorry, I'm going to be blowing through these ones quickly. Traveling monkeys, so this is one we'll try in the workout today. But yeah, so again, we're doing that squat pattern, and then we're trying to go side to side, and that's a really good one to open up the adductors. Again, you can do knuckle or hands open with those ones. People love making noises during these ones, so it's really fun. But again, it's kind of that lunging, bending, twisting. We're seeing that hip hinging. So again, in people with back issues, I'm going to really be cueing that hip hinging, that we're not totally, rounded like a hunchback or a gorilla totally on that one. So yeah, you can do skips and swings and monkey climbs. Think like on monkey bars. And same thing, pull-ups or pulls, so it depends on your facility. We'll sometimes use the TRX stuff. Playgrounds, super easy to be able to do that. So we go back to our flamingo balance. So then teaching the proper hip hinging for that. So this is one of my favorite exercises for most people, and the different levels we'll go through. But when we're teaching that proper hip hinging pattern, this is one of the ones we are really concerned about, that spine alignment, so that if you ask people to do this one right away, they're going to probably do something like this. Okay, and when we actually keep the spine straight and tip forward, so it's like a bar there, I'm tipping over, and go really slow, you're going to see that knee going all over the place. We're trying to actually recruit the glute muscles. Now, one thing in balance is a lot of people aren't naturally going to do that. So we start with that flamingo, we cue, squeeze your glute, and then being able to tip forward and nice and slow, kind of chest out that way. People going as low as they're comfortable with. This is one of the safest exercises too, because you're not getting torsion on the knee. They can go next to something if they're feeling off balance. For training balance and stability, that's one of our best ones, because if we have a left-right difference. So as Dom said, I broke my ankle this summer, so I'm really working on the side that I broke and that getting that balance and stability back. So I did all my little ankle exercises and circles and all that stuff, and I was very excited when I could move up to these ones, and I was horrible at them. But again, these ones will take a long time for people to start working on, but especially for preventing ankle sprains or falls, that's a really, really good one. Balance, not flexibility, is our greatest predictor of injury. So balance training is one of the most important things you can incorporate at some level, even rest sets. So we're doing a hard workout. I like to do a little break where we're doing a balance movement and working on it then, and people can catch the breath. So you can do that stork to drinking bird. So I can either have my hands here or I can take the hands back. The other thing you'll notice is the position of the back leg can change, so we can go from a bent leg or to more of an extended one. It's just going to depend on the person, probably what's easiest for them to maintain that neutral alignment. So crab walks, we all know that, Sebastian. It's my favorite. And so we know the crab walk, again, on people who are at computers a lot, that's going to be a harder one. That might put a lot of strain through the wrist, so they can go on the knuckles there. Or again, instead of here, I'm doing my elbow thing. So soft bend here and out to the side, so more of that neutral position. So again, in that crab position, if you can get the people in there comfortably, there's a lot of different variations you can do. So we'll just, again, kind of go through these next ones quickly. So there's crab flips, so we're going into like an extension and a reach. There's kicks, so we remove a balance point. Okay, so from any basic position in quadruped, how do I make it harder? I get rid of one of the body parts, right? So the first one, we go into that extension and reach with the arm. This one is more with the legs. Then we can add in that arm and leg at the same time. Crunches, so now I'm trying to do a little bit of rotation with that, okay? Beast reaches, so this is one that's sort of like a mountain climber, and you're on that all fours, so we're going here, but then in between each one you go back into basically a child's pose, and it's again working on that planking position. So I actually like this sort of stuff for people that may not have the strongest ab muscles yet, because to just hold that stationary plank might be a little bit hard, so we'd hold it 5-6 seconds at a time, and then we're moving in and out of it, but we're getting the hips moving, right? So if my hips are tight from sitting all day, do I want to just stretch them out and forget about them? No. So you'll see with a lot of these, it's the knee coming up, working the hip flexor to help strengthen them. So crocodile and salamander, this is one of my favorite ones because you can crawl forward, you can crawl backwards, you can do opposite arm and leg, same arm and leg. So slidey surface is obviously best for this, this stuff. And same sort of idea, it's almost that alligator push-up or a staggered push-up. So you just, to progress that, okay, I take my knees and chest off the ground and I'm crawling along and doing the push-ups that way. Same thing, a deep hip flexion one, so alligator crawl. So it's going into that push-up and then rotating. So as you're going side to side, okay? So it's, with all of them, it's just a tiny little difference between them. You have a completely different exercise. And it's kind of stretching everything out. Now, crawling patterns, so there's a zillion of these. So first of all, we see them, you know, in babies crawling around. But there's a bunch of different variations on this. So you know how we talked about contralateral and ipsilateral patterns at the start? So I go opposite arm leg, so it's kind of like a bear crawl. There's ones that we say like our panther or tiger, that same arm, same leg at the same at one time. So if you come up to standing for a second, so we're going to balance on, we'll just balance on one side because I won't make you crawl around in here. People will really wonder what's going on if we start crawling in this room. So what these crawling patterns would either be so something where I'm extending, or when I extend forward, I bring this knee up at the same time. So it's this movement. So both are coming up at the same time. Now there's animals, they go so here and then here. So it's okay, and then there's other ones, we're going opposite. So that's the contralateral, and now opposite. We got your brains thinking a little. This is, I train a lot of professors here. They're the smartest people.
They cannot do
They're on the news. They're like the expert in this. I'm like left leg, no other left leg. Right, and I'm the same some days too. I'm like, which one am I doing? And, you know, so, but that's actually a really good thing because think about this, you know, if we're going in these movement patterns or we're challenging someone's coordination system, we're getting that, you know, we talk about neuroplasticity or challenging the brain and that movement to help, you know, keep people, you know, engaged, number one, in what they're doing, but keep their body moving freely and being able to sort of challenge them a little more. And so yeah, if you can teach an old dog new tricks for sure. And there's, like I said, a lot of times our tendency with people is to just go to, you know, okay, we're like doing our bicycles this way or shoulder press or that sort of thing, but we don't have that movement pattern trained in them. And same thing, that challenge for balance. So it's all stationary. So that challenging people's coordination, at first they're just going to be like, it just takes a second. But then you're giving them also, think of it as like computer programs, you're giving them more computer programs to work with. So if they do fall or trip or lose their balance, that they have more ways to be able to move. And this is something also, like I said, with kids or with athletes, we often get so stuck on, okay, I 100%, we do squats, we do deadlifts, we do Olympic lifting, et cetera, et cetera. We also have a free movement day. When I went to Richmond Oval for the Volleyball Canada program I work with, have you heard of Misha Harris out there in Victoria? Or no, have you heard of Misha Harris out there? Okay, so anyways, he's one of the top strength coaches in the country. And I went to go watch him do a workout with these 16-year-old kids, and they went on the gymnastics area and they were playing. And he's like, especially at this level, they get to that specialization phase in their sports. They aren't doing that anymore. They aren't challenging their body how to move freely. They aren't being able to be spontaneous. They're always told what to do. So you can teach people these patterns and then say, okay, like just pair yours together, or ask people like, what's your favorite one? Okay, let's do that. And, you know, and then with those athletes, again, you just have more tools in the toolbox. Their body knows more ways to move. And same thing for your general population or students, because if they're doing intramurals, they're doing these other sports, just because they're not at a, you know, varsity or national level, it doesn't mean they're not going to need those movement patterns, because we want to keep them engaged and still playing, you know, whatever those activities are. So if they, like I said, that's going to benefit them as well. Are they going to be able to do the same version? Maybe not, but they're going to be able to do a version of it. So yeah, there's panther, so bear crawls, that's one of the other ones that's pretty common. So that's one of the opposite arm leg ones. No, that's good. So we can then take a bear pose where we like rotate and kick through. So again, we do that progression of removing a balance point, add a bit of rotation in with that. Tiger, so this is the one when I was saying that same arm, same leg one. So they're one of the animals that you'll see basically that same side pattern on. And again with these ones, so we look at that spine and we're trying to cue that neutral or flat spine. So cue words I'll use for people, okay, yeah, you have eggs on your hips there. So when we're crawling, we're not kind of dropping like this. I'm putting more torsion on the spine for some of these ones. So yeah, duck walk we've seen. You can go, yeah, keep going through these. Frog jumps. So again, obviously a modification. I don't do a full deep squat on that one. Elephant. So this is one of my favorite ones because their trunks. Well, first you start down here, and then we go up onto the hind legs, and then we're into elephant. But again, we go in that quadruped position. So coming back to that diaphragm breathing and neutral spine. A lot of these positions originate from that, so if you can teach that really well or get someone stable there, same thing in the bear crawls, which that bear crawl is if I'm here, right, I'm going opposite arm and leg that way, that again, all these other ones are going to be easier, so we're going from that quadruped to both legs. So yeah, we say angry elephants. Oh yeah. Like I said, it's, and those, again, coming back to the volleyball team, they're really loud, and it's funny. And people just looking down the track, and they're all like, and going down with monkeys, and they ask to make noises, so I'm like, go ahead. So yeah, another one of the ones that's biped, so kangaroo. So like this here, and we're doing little hops. We can go, left, right. You can go all over the place. And it's kind of fun if once you get to this point, you can start mixing them up. So it's like kangaroo, back to elephant. Let's go down to panther. Okay, salamander, get back up. And so you can go back to the previous sequencing, especially once people are a bit more familiar with it, and it's easier. So cat stretch, cool down. If you just lay there after you're done and everyone's tired. But again, just working on that extension through the spine and relaxing the back out. And that's another time I'll work on some of that breathing with people and that awareness. One question I commonly get about the stuff with the breathing, which we started with at the beginning, was how long is it going to take someone to figure that out? It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks. See where they're at. Try and pick the most simple thing to start with. Try with yourself first. I experiment on myself constantly. I think I just took a bunch of K-tape off my legs. Do you guys know what K-tape is? The kinesio tape? It's the bright colored tape you'll see on people's arms and knees for muscle activation. So I was doing, taping my legs up the other day, trying different, stuff like that. And same with these ones. I always make sure that I'm really comfortable with either, whatever method that is or that movement before I'm starting to implement that and teach that to someone else. So that's one of the big things. I've made for sure some trainer mistakes where I'm like, that looks cool. We're going to do that in workout today, and I demo and fall off the ball and I'm like, I should have thought about this a little bit more. So, again, with these, it's good to, actually get practice with those movements and see how it actually feels to go through a full workout like that. Do you guys have any questions? Yes? Exactly. So that's a really good question. Especially when we look at neuromuscular movement patterns, that especially from DNS, is those are ingrained in our system. So we are born with those patterns. We're generally trying to restore the function of those, so it should become automatic again. I don't even think about it anymore, and I can easily do that. And again, that volleyball player that I work with, he's like, I don't even think about it anymore. And a lot of them, once they have to really focus on it for maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks. And then when we exercise, again, we're trying to really focus on it then. But as far as just throughout their regular day, they don't even think about it anymore. And it's because it's a computer program you are built with. We're just trying to kind of turn the light switch on for it again and get you using those muscles and all of that again. And it's the same with a lot of these movement patterns. These crawling patterns, you have that from when you were a baby. Like, that doesn't go away. We just use them less and less. And like I said, with less movement, that's why we start to see a lot of those, chronic pain or injuries happening. Any other questions? We're all good? Okay, well, thank you very much. And hopefully you come to work out.
So I just wanted to personally thank Caroline because I basically had to talk her into coming to do this. She was really nervous about doing this, but as you can see, she's very knowledgeable and a great resource for us to have at the faculty. And I'm so happy. So we have a game here for you to play.
Oh.
And if you want, we talk some of the people into coming with you to that Primal Movement pattern workout. Because it's going to be hilarious.
Yeah.
And you'll be tired. So it'll be worth it. So thanks.
It'll be fun, and I have really good music for it because I like Disney movies, and there's so many there. But that's the other thing that's super funny is I'll even do spin classes, same thing with that theme. So it's like animal theme movement or whatever, and people just get a kick out of it. So so come to the workout if you're free, and otherwise have a really great day, guys.
We're all meeting here, and then we're going to
Yeah.
the break is just in the atrium.